Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back in Sri Lanka. It's my third visit. Some 10 years ago, I started the thinking about integrated thinking and integrated reporting in this beautiful country. A distinction of mine, which you should have mentioned, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, is that I'm an honorary member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, which I think is pertinent for this evening. What I've been asked to talk about, recognizing you, Mr. Speaker, as the honorary guest this evening, is why integrated reporting and good governance for sustainable value creation. Well, in order to deal with that subject, I'm going to take you back to the middle of the 19th century. Because it is in the middle of the 19th century that wealthy families used to give risk capital to organizations to start businesses. But when those businesses went bankrupt, those wealthy families were also liable for the indebtedness for the monies owed to creditors and employees. They started balking against this and said, we're no longer going to make capital available to these organizations. The government of the day said, no, we have to continue creating jobs. Please, you must continue granting capital. It was the thought leadership of the day in the United Kingdom and Massachusetts in America that came up with the concept of creating an incapacitated, artificial person with limited liability, but concomitantly limited rights. There was not huge enthusiasm for this. It was opposed by some members of society, especially theologians, who said, who are we as mankind? And ladies, in those days it was mankind, not humankind. Who are we as mankind to create a person? Only the Almighty can create a person. And we're going to create a person that has no heart, no mind, no soul, and has no conscience. The theologians were correct. When you form a new company today, you have an intangible, incapacitated, artificial person that is inanimate until its corporate leaders are appointed. And its corporate leaders become the conscience of the company. And it is their conduct which will determine whether the company is or is not seen to be a responsible corporate citizen creating sustainable value. Well, one of the consequences of this arrangement was that members of the wealthy family also became directors of the company. And perhaps it was natural for other stakeholders, such as employees, to see them as the primary stakeholder, which led to a concept of the primacy of the shareholder moving into the 20th century. And Henry Ford, the Ford Motor Company Limited, in 1919, made excessive profits, $65 million US. Today, probably $6 billion. And Henry Ford announced he was going to increase the wages of his employees to encourage them to work longer hours and over weekends to meet the demand for his product, the Model T Ford. A minority shareholder, the Dodge brothers, who later became a competitor, said, you cannot do that, Mr. Ford, you and your board, because the shareholder is the owner of the company and has primary of place amongst other stakeholders. The board's first duty is to act in the best interest of the shareholder, and you should declare that excessive profit as a dividend to shareholders before increasing the wages of employees or improving your plant and machinery. Henry Ford refused. The Dodge brothers took the Ford Motor Company Limited to court, and the court declared that the shareholders are the primary stakeholder, and these excessive profits should be declared as a dividend to the shareholders before increasing the wages of employees. So I pose a question to all of you. Can you see any court in any society today making that order? The answer, I think, is clearly in the negative. That's how society has moved on. And the whole concept of stakeholders has moved on. But this concept of the primacy of the shareholder and making decisions in the best interest of the shareholders was exacerbated in the 1970s by Milton Friedman, who got a Nobel laureate prize for his thesis, "The sole purpose of the corporation, the company, is to make profit for the interests of its owners, the shareholders, and directors should act according to their design with respect to the deceased." What he was saying is, directors, do not apply your mind to the issues at hand. Just carry out the directives from the shareholders. The consequence of the primacy of the shareholder was that the 20th century was one of unsustainable development. Companies believed, boards of directors believed, success lay in increased profit, increased share price, increased dividend. If you achieved those three criteria, you had a successful company, notwithstanding, as we know today, that it was at a cost to society and the environment. And we have inherited planet Earth in a worse condition than it was towards the end of the 20th century. But we had the third industrial revolution in the 60s and 70s, the computer age. Because of the computer age, people were able to do research with greater expedition. And this led to the empirical study and conclusion by 1995 to 1997, that's the end of the 20th century, that we had reached ecological overshoot. The technical term for companies in the main, individuals to a lesser extent, were using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. Clearly not a sustainable matter. Also, towards the end of the 20th century, this expedited research showed that the makeup of the market capitalization of some of the world's great iconic companies, such as the S&P 500, 80% of the market cap by the end of the 20th century was not representative by additives in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards, be they FA, Financial Accounting Standards Board Standards of America, or International Financial Reporting Standards, which is adopted around virtually the rest of the world. An extraordinary happening. A change of thinking was needed. In 1997, the GRI was founded. Why? Because it was felt there was a need to give guidance to directors in reporting and to discharge their duty of accountability to report on these, what became as known as non-financial assets or intangible assets. Well, there was also the oil from food scandal at the United Nations by 2000. I was privileged to be asked to chair the United Nations on Governance and Oversight, which I did for several years, and I became chairman of the Global Reporting Initiative, trying to give guidance to directors on how to report on this extraordinary thing where there had been a change in the market capitalization of companies. Financial capital model, the primacy of the shareholder, persisted, however, into the 21st century. It exploded in 2008 with the global financial crisis. That led in 2009 to the coalition of inclusive capitalism. Inclusive capitalism is to see whether the business model of the company, its strategy is one that the outcome will be a positive impact on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development: the economy, society, and the environment. It was in 2009 at the United Nations that I was asked to call a meeting with IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants. The World Bank was there, the World Chairman of the Big Four, IOSCO, some of the world's great regulators, some of the world's great asset owners and asset managers. It was agreed, Chatham House rules, nothing goes out of this room. But it was at that meeting that the then president of IFAC and the chief executive said, we have to now concede or conclude that financial reporting, although critical, is no longer sufficient. I was able to say, as chairman of the United Nations and chairman of the GRI, sustainability reporting has become more important, but without the numbers, it's meaningless. I went further, and this discussion progressed, that to report, as companies were now doing by 2009 in two silos, a financial report and a sustainability report, was divorced from reality. Because companies do not operate on a basis of financial capital in Colombo, human capital in Dubai, and intellectual capital in Johannesburg, South Africa. It doesn't operate like that. These things are integrated. These discussions went ahead over several years. By 2010, 2011, the International Integrated Reporting Council was formed at St. James's Palace under the charitable guidance of His Royal Highness Prince Charles. And by 2013, we had the Integrated Reporting Framework, giving guidance to companies how boards should look at what is material in the financial report and the sustainability report, and explain that in clear, concise, and understandable language. Governance was also looked at through different spectacles. It had become a mindless tick box exercise. We have a preponderance of non-executive directors, tick. We have an audit committee, tick. A nominations committee, tick, etc. A mindless grudge compliance. That developed into following the value creation model of inputs to outcomes rather than stopping at your output, your product. And governance today has developed on a basis of asking, what are the outcomes that an organization should achieve for the external stakeholders in the main, also internal, to come to the conclusion that this company, this organization, is practicing quality governance. And the four critical governance factors are value creation in a sustainable manner, ethical culture with effective leadership, adequate and effective controls with informed oversight by the board, trust and confidence by the community in the company, in the area in which it operates, with legitimacy of operations. Now, any organization sitting in this room who achieves those outcomes from a governance point of view is practicing good governance. And it becomes a mindful outcomes-based approach. Directors have to start asking themselves the questions, have I crossed what I call the self-river? Have I left behind the question of greed, self-enrichment, fear? Shouldn't make this decision because maybe one day it will be seen to be a decision which has caused harm to the company and I might be sued. I'd rather say no to this question, instead of fulfilling your duty as a director to take risk for reward. Well, value creation today is a phrase used instead of profit. I experienced that for the first time in 2012 in London, when we had a conference and the world's great asset managers and asset owners were at that conference. The world profit wasn't mentioned once. It was about value creation, including BlackRock, CalPERS, Norwegian Oil Fund, etc. So stakeholder relationships is also important. What are the resources used by a company in producing its product or rendering its service? What are the relationships with its stakeholders? If the outcome of your business model is a negative impact on these three critical dimensions, the economy, society, and the environment, do you have a strategy to eradicate or ameliorate those negative impacts? What are the positive impacts? Do you have a strategy to enhance those? So there are 4 agenda items which any board should have today on their agenda. And I'm prepared to wager very few, if any, in this room have these 4 agenda items on their agendas and discuss them at their board meetings. Inputs to outcomes. Directors and boards start the process of strategy and stop at output, the product. But your product goes out into society and has an impact. Stakeholder relationships. The board should be informed of that ongoing relationship, otherwise its oversight function is blind, it's not informed. IT governance and cybersecurity, absolutely critical in a world in which there are 2 kinds of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. And then there's integrated functions. We've all heard the acronym GRC, Governance, Risk and Compliance. Yesterday's thinking. Because what is the body that has the final oversight? It is the board. We should have an integration of governance, risk and compliance factors and the board today. I want to conclude with 2 things. I want to pose a question to all of you. What is or who is the body of persons who are the most informed about what the state of play is in a company and what its outlook is, short, medium and long term? I think the answer is clear. It is the board. The board is the most informed body of persons. It meets, let's say, 6 times a year. And if, for example, it has those agenda items and the usual information fed to a board, it is much more informed than its stakeholders. You have this extraordinary situation of an informed body of people with uninformed stakeholders. Now you can do an annual report with financial and a sustainability report according to the GRI standards. But what you're doing is leaving it to the uninformed stakeholder to decide for him, herself or itself what is material and what are the challenges and circumstances in the short, medium and long term. Instead of the informed directors take it upon themselves to remove this information from IFRS speak and GRI speak, and in clear, concise and clear language, tell the uninformed stakeholder what the probable challenges and circumstances are, short, medium and long term, so that those stakeholders can make an informed assessment about the company. The next point I want to talk about is Sustainable Development Goal 17. It is the only goal that is not outcomes-based. Clean water, clean production, life below the water line, the blue line. It is Goal 17. It is about cooperation, collaboration. The various providers of frameworks around the world are dealing with matters of public interest. and hope to achieve a public good outcome. These are not matters of intellectual property which should be closed in a corporate closet and protected. These are matters in which there should be collaboration. It is, some people have described it as an outrage. I describe it as very problematic that we actually have in a cluster of reporting, such as climate change reporting, several thought leaderships and guidelines and standards. The board that I sit on decides to adopt this guideline. Your board decides to adopt another guideline. First of all, the time wasting in choosing which function, which guideline, which framework. And comparability of the information becomes diluted. Collaboration between the providers of frameworks is absolutely essential. That's why the Memorandum of Understanding between CIPFA and CMA today is to be applauded. Thank you very much for listening to me.